Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. Some not so obvious watch news today for week 49 of 2019. Kick straight into it. After a couple of weeks of everything being very quiet, suddenly this week seems to have been really busy with an awful lot going on. So I've got a fair bit to get through. I'll rattle through fairly quickly. There's a lot of these topics I actually found really interesting, so I might come back to in later videos and do some more on. So we'll start with, it will come as a surprise to no one that steel sports watches, luxury steel sports watches, blue face, steel case, integrated bracelet, that sort of thing, you know the drill, are all the rage. A. Lange & Söhne did their recent Odysseus model, which was sort of I suppose a hit with the hardcore favourites, and a bit of a miss with just about everyone else. But anyway, there's been a lot of talk about that trend and that luxury. Two really interesting articles I'd point you towards on that topic. The first one is from Deployant, who have done a bit of a run through of 6 of the luxury sports watches around at the moment, and the other one, which is probably a better article and I'd really recommend, would be at Revolution. And Revolution's going to be a bit of a theme. They've had a few interesting articles in the last couple of days talking a little bit more about the history and evolution of the luxury steel sports watch. Maybe I'm a fan of it because I agree completely that too many people get hung up on the whole homage word and how horrible and destructive that is to understanding what really happened in that luxury steel sports watch. Great article, go over and read it, and you'll have a much richer appreciation of watches other than the Royal Oak in this area. Some more media stuff. There's been a lot of discussion lately. I don't know if it's GPHG and Only Watch that's driven this, but I've been sensing a lot of discussion about the importance of independence and independent watch brands in the watch community and how we should be trying to support them. I would love to, except for the fact that they're normally horrendously expensive and well outside my price range. But there's 2 articles on another online magazine, Quill and Pad. The first one talking about what is an independent and why they're important, and then the next day they followed it up with what's so hard about being an independent brand. Again, really interesting look into a part of the watch community that probably most of us won't participate in, but I think we're all still glad it's there. So again, 2 really interesting articles. Recommend you go check those out. Some watch news. A watch I would love. I absolutely, when I read this article, I was fascinated by the watch. I think it is gorgeous, it's interesting, it's hilarious, it's beautifully made, and that is the Greubel Forsey GMT Sport. This watch is, I'm not normally one for like super high horology. I'm normally not one for this kind of more elaborate looking watches, but this one just grabs me and I love it. Only one problem, it's a tick, I think it's 490,000 Swiss francs, so it's about 480,000 Swiss francs more than I can ever imagine spending on a watch, but it is an amazing piece of work. And if you want to see, sort of hard on the heels of some of the stuff we were just talking about with independence, if you want to see what can be achieved and how sometimes this haute horology can be actually still quite cool, go check that watch out. I love it. Okay, so the next watch is absolutely obvious, and it's the watch everyone's talking about, which is the new James Bond Seamaster. And frankly, I think this is a stunning watch. This is a watch that really shows you how good looking how fundamentally good looking that Seamaster is. It's largely got rave reviews by everyone. Again, I'm going to point you towards I'm going to probably put up something from the Revolution website, but this watch has had wall-to-wall coverage from everyone. I just think it's amazing. I think it's a fantastic watch. The only topic that's really interesting and that's in any way divisive I've found has been over the colouring of the lume, and I've chosen that quite carefully. Is it fauxtina? Is it a faux patina, or is it simply a colour choice? Really interesting question. I'm not sure. I think look, it probably is Fotina, given that they've gone for kind of across the board, they've gone for a kind of retro feel. But on the other hand, if you throw that aside, and imagine you threw that whole aged thing out and simply looked at it as a set of colours, it's probably just a really good set of colours, going for that kind of terracotta loom look. So if you can put the faux patina to one side and simply look at that watch purely on the basis of aesthetics, it's a stunner and it's gorgeous, and it's right now I'd say it's possibly one of the best looking watches released all year. And the final watch I'm going to talk about today is a release from Vacheron Constantin, which is a new 36mm version of their Patrimony Blue. Gorgeous watch again, not something I could ever see myself buying. Not a big dress watch fan, not a big rose gold fan, but it is a stunning watch. It led me to go look at how Vacheron market these watches in light of the fact that it's being sort of spoken about as a female friendly size. I was curious to see in the wake of how I'd spoken about people advertising and marketing their sort of the gender of their watches, how Vacheron would approach this. If you go look at their website, Vacheron do something really interesting. When you go straight to their website, all they have is the watches and the collections that they have. So if you click open the Patrimony collection, you will see every single version of the Patrimony, including those which would be more likely to be directed towards males and those more likely to be directed towards females, but all under one collection, and no gender markings, no obvious gender markings I can see in any of the descriptions. Curiously, if you go to the bottom of the page, there is a men's section and a women's section. Maybe that's not a bad compromise about saying, if you're in the know, if you are a collector and understand watches, they encourage you to go straight into the collection. However, if you aren't in the know, if you aren't someone who's into the watch collecting hobby, then perhaps having a men's and women's section as a prompt for newcomers, maybe not such a bad idea. I don't know. Okay, so we're coming to the end of 2019, which means we're entering best of series. The only best of that I've seen so far that's really caught my attention is again on monochrome.com, and they've done their best 5 GMT or travel watches of 2019. In amongst the usual suspects like the Rolex Batman, they've got 2 watches that I would really like you to look at. One would be the Porsche design UTC watch of this year, which I think is really cool. And the other one, which may come as a surprise from me because I'm not that much of a dress watch guy, but if I ever do go hardcore on a dress watch, I think it's going to be a Jaeger. There's something about that design that just really appeals to me. And their Grand Second World Time or Dual Time is a watch that I just love. So again, go check that website out, go check that article out. It gives you some of the usual suspects, but also some other interesting watches that you may have slipped past you this year. Okay, some industry news, and start with a very Australian flavour, again reported in Revolution. Jaeger Le-Coultre, I hope I've said that okay, have introduced their first monobrand boutique in Australia in connection with Kennedy, which is kind of like a big distributor, multi-brand distributor of watches in Australia. It's in Sydney, I believe. So there's an article in Revolution. Again, I'll put up a page of that and a link in the show notes. You can go read all about it. It's interesting given what else is going on in the Richemont world and how Richemont seem to be really going hard on these single mono-brand boutique. Fascinating to know what the economics of this are. Fascinating to know if it works or not. But yeah, it does seem to be something that Richemont in particular are really going hard on. Speaking of Richemont, I missed this. This is actually a couple of weeks old. The rumour is that Richemont are turning away from Govberg, turning away from Watchbox. And, well, in fact, I'll rephrase it, are turning away from Govberg Jewelers. And that Govberg will no longer be an AD for Richemont brands. the theories across the internet, there seems to be two theories about what's going on here. The most obvious one is, given that Watchbox seem to be having increasingly close ties, or Govberg seem to be having increasingly close ties with Rolex, and Govberg own Watchbox, which is a competitor to Watchfinder, Richemont are using, if you like, seeing both of those as reasons to disengage from Govberg's. You know, fairly obvious. Why would you sell your products to essentially the friend of your competitor? A second theory, and the one that I'm probably a bigger fan of, is that Richemont, as I said, are reinforcing their own boutiques, their own mono-brand AD systems. They seem to be wanting to consolidate what they're doing through ADs. And it could be that by moving away from using Govberg as an AD, they actually open up an option to increasingly use Watchbox as a grey market second string distributor of those watches which they can't sell through their mainstream ADs, much like many other companies will also do with companies like Chronext and Watchfinder. That actually makes more sense to me. Sticking with industry news, Rolex is suing a watch modder. That strikes me as both entirely predictable and entirely strange. I really don't know what to make of it. If this had happened 100 years, if this had happened 50 years ago, before we had created a whole industry around pretty much every kind of product you can name of second order companies modifying and rebuilding and hot rodding and performance upgrading other companies' products, maybe the Rolex move would have made sense. Maybe I could have seen a way it could succeed. But in a world where, whether it's a car, a bike, a computer, a watch, it's expected that the owners of those watches will have options to take them to someone to mod them. I don't understand what Rolex is doing here. I'm not sure. It strikes me that if Rolex is successful, this could fundamentally change the relationship between consumers and brands and the rest of the market in a way I never imagined could possibly happen. So I don't know what's going to happen here, but it's a fascinating case. I'll put a link up. You can go read about it. And I would love to know what your thoughts are about should it succeed. And then if it succeeds, what are the options? What are the ideas that this could spill through the rest of the industry? I don't know. And finally, in industry news, I mentioned in my last video that Dubai Watch Week was on. I was thinking that I might go through and do a bit of a skim and try and cover that in more detail. I have not done that. Didn't get as much mainstream coverage as I would have expected. Possibly, maybe because there wasn't a lot of novelties. And curiously, watch media doesn't like talking about issues. It tends to like talking about watches. So maybe that's why. But anyway, the upshot is there is one article about this that I think every watch lover is interested in something other than just the watches, but is also interested in the media and the industry and the relationships around watches, really should go check out. It's an article on Watch Pro. Again, I'll have notes below and I'll put the screen up in front of me now. Written by Ariel Adams, touching on the 5 big things, the 5 big trends he saw coming out of Dubai. I'm not going to run through them all now, and in fact I'm going to make that a video that I do later. He talks about things like the failure of the watch industry to educate their consumers, the failure of what you might see as the traditional or professional media, watch media, a whole bunch of things. Well worth covering. I will do a whole video on it later, so I won't spoil that now, but you can spoil it by going off and reading that article. I really recommend it. Sticking with a common theme, Time and Tide have done another article about the importance or lack thereof of in-house movements, where the trend has come from. Look, it's something that on one hand's been done to death, but it is such an interesting topic. It's always worth reading about. I have done my own video on this before, mostly looking at it from my perspective about why I don't think it's important, but why I don't particularly value in-house movements. But again, the Time and Tide article is very good. I'd recommend people go check it out. In there, they do talk about some of the factors which have led to more and more people getting really interested in producing in-house movements, and some of the things that have perhaps propelled it. By and large, they've spoken about the kind of common things that we've all discussed. That is that the most common one is Swatch were making it more difficult for people to get hold of ETA movements. That compelled other people to do other things. They also started talking about how there was this idea that for a brand to be a real watchmaker, they had to be making their own movements. All of that is absolutely true. Wouldn't deny either of those. I think there's a couple of other issues that are really worth hammering in on. Some of them were in my previous video, which were, I think over the last 10 years, you've seen a real influx of new people into the watch collecting community. I think amongst those new collectors, there's a real lack of confidence in trying to assess really quite complex, subtle and nuanced things like design, but it's actually reasonably simple to say this watch has an in-house movement, this watch does not, therefore this watch is better. And I think those new collectors, and as I said, their relative lack of confidence in picking a watch, means that they tend to privilege the nice and easy to see things like in-house movement. That's probably compounded by an awful lot of enthusiast and paraprofessional commentators like me, many of whom again are kind of uncomfortable talking about good design versus bad design, kind of find it difficult to unpick complicated and nuanced histories, and therefore they like to hone in on in-house movement, nice and easy. You can give it a tick, elevate that watch without having to try and make a complex argument about why the design of one particular watch is better or worse than another. The final thing I think I've been thinking that we've kind of forgotten about is how over the last 10 years in particular, whole new industrial supply chains have opened up. Now, many of you are going to be thinking, well, the whole opening up of China doesn't make a great deal of difference because we're talking about, in general, Swiss-made or in some cases German-made watches. But what would be really interesting would be to check the country of origin of the computing and machining hardware that's being brought into these new production lines. I'm going to guess that if you went into a lot of these new facilities coming online to make in-house movements, what you'd in fact see would be an awful lot of CNC machines, really high-end CAD/CAM driving computers that are vastly cheaper than anything that could have been bought by these companies 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And that the incredibly prohibitive capital costs of setting up a production line for an in-house movement of 10 years ago may have absolutely plummeted. And whilst I'm not for an instant saying that this manufacture, a lot of these new movements aren't in-house, so take for example the Tudor MT movements, I'm not for an instant saying that they're sneaking off and sourcing those movements elsewhere. What we know is that Tudor is ameliorating those costs, spreading those costs out, sharing the costs of that with other companies. So Tudor has a relationship with another brand, I might mispronounce this, I think it's Kinesi, which is a third-party provider for a number of other companies. That company is itself partially owned by Chanel. They make third-party movements. They make third-party movements for a number of other brands. They have some kind of relationship with Tudor. I'm not sure what that is, but at the same time, there are reports that Tudor and Kinesi are co-building facilities, co-building production houses elsewhere. all of which must drive the cost down through the floor. Add to that arrangements coming up with, like the ones between Tudor and Breitling, with movement swaps, so that when Tudor develops a watch, they can be confident of having perhaps twice the market sales that they would have had than if they'd just been doing it by themselves, and having that arrangement guarantee them the provision of top of the line chronographs, in this case from Breitling. I think we can't ignore that behind these in-house movements from Tudor or Chanel or from anyone else who's bringing them, there's a web of other cooperative developments and platform sharing and IP sharing and facility and cost sharing that is going on and facilitating this, which perhaps wasn't available 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So that's really it. That's my take on the watch news of this week. Hope you found that interesting. Hope I pointed you out some things that you might have missed otherwise. Some of this, like I said, I sort of skimmed over the top of, because I think topics like some of the issues that Ariel Adams raised out of Dubai are actually worth videos all of their own. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. If you hang around a little bit, a card will come up with my contact details and my Instagram handle. Please give us a follow over there on Instagram. Please like and subscribe to this video. You don't have to like the video, and in fact, if you didn't like the video, downvote it. But if you do that, I'd love it if you told me why and what you didn't like. Please subscribe to the channel. It has a number of benefits. It helps this channel grow. It helps me market this channel to other people and develop it. And it just makes me feel better and gives me an idea that I'm going somewhere. Thanks very much, and I'll see you later. Bye.